Hey guys, it's Busta here. So this is just a little reminder to anyone who may not know that you can now find exclusive horror story videos on Twitch, where I also live stream Monday to Friday each day. If you would like to join in on the live streaming action, or just wish to listen to more stories, just hit the link in the description below and follow me on Twitch. Also, due to the adpocalypse, this channel is now moving towards becoming independently funded by viewers. So if you would like to watch all of the videos that I create in MP3 format, or would like to just simply support me to continue to do what I'm doing here for as little as $1 a month, please click on the link in the description below and become a patron today. Also, thank you to everyone who has been supporting me, whether it's here on YouTube, on Twitch, or through Patreon. I hope you all enjoy this week's videos, and without further ado, let's begin. This happened in August 2010 in a small village by the sea in Greece. Before I start telling the story, I should probably explain some things. You see, in Greece, it's very usual for city people to have summer houses or apartments, where they can spend most of their free weekends away from the heat of the city. The interesting thing about these kinds of villages is that the streets don't have names or house numbers. In fact, most of the times, they don't even have asphalt. So, you understand that we're talking about a village that is dead during the winter. My family has one such house in this village with a big yard. For the record, I am male. I was spending a weekend there with my two friends. Let's call them Iris and Hera. We decided to leave the house and go for some drinks to the nearest beach bar, which was inside a university campsite. We locked the doors on the front gate and we left. Around 1 o'clock, we started heading back to the house. The distance from the beach bar to the house was about 40 minutes on foot. On our way back, a few minutes before turning right from the main road, we saw a rather small dog and decided to play a little with him and take him back to the house to give him something to eat or drink. Odd as it may sound for a stray dog, the dog stopped, and even though my friend Iris kept calling him, he wouldn't follow us. So we just went into the house after locking the front gate. We changed clothes, and since we couldn't sleep, we decided to have a couple of drinks on the porch, from which, for the record, the front gate isn't visible. We must have been sitting for about 20 minutes on the porch talking and drinking when we saw the same dog coming to our direction. As we were playing with him, he turned around to face in the direction of the front gate and stood still like a statue. Iris kept petting him and gave him something to eat, but he wouldn't react to anything. He just continued looking in the same direction. Well, we decided to just leave him alone and just went on talking. Not long after that, though, we heard steps on the grass. Immediately, we turned our cell phone flashlights on, but we couldn't see anything or anyone. But the sound of the steps was now heading closer and closer to the porch. The dog started crying and took a step back, as if something was coming towards it. We went inside the house, and Hera tried to get the dog inside as well, but he wouldn't move. He kept staring in the same direction as always. Well, a little freaked out, we locked every door and closed the shutters. But at the same time, we thought that maybe we were overreacting. It could have been a cat, even though the steps sounded somewhat heavier. We heard the dog crying through the shutters though, and it sounded as if it was about to start barking. Suddenly though, someone kicked it and it started barking. We all sat in silence trying to listen carefully as the dog just kept barking. We tried to find a simple explanation, like a cat, even though the sound of human steps was now unmistakable. We just couldn't see anything through the shutters though. The last thing we heard was the dog being kicked against something and hitting it hard. And after that, the barking stopped. Well, we called the police even though we knew that they were one village away and that my house was quite remote with no street name or house number. Terrified as we were, we took out kitchen knives in case we needed to defend ourselves. We could only see through a small barred window, and as I approached it, we heard someone knocking 3 times on the shutters. Well, we screamed, trying to scare the person, but we didn't hear anyone trying to get away. It was as if the person who knocked was still standing outside of the window. I looked outside of the barred window, but I didn't see anything. After 10 minutes, the police called to ask our exact location. I gave them all the information and continued talking to my friends. Not long after that, I looked again outside of the window, and to my horror, I saw the dark figure of a man in the yard. The lighting was rather dim, so his face was kind of blurry. I tried not to scream as my blood froze. After 2 or 3 minutes just staring at this guy, the phone rang. It was the police, and I told them where they had to turn to find my house, and in 1 minute they were there. They searched every inch of the house and the yard for 15 minutes, but they found no one. They told us that they could give us a ride to the nearest bar, which was again the beach bar of the university campsite. Without hesitation, we took the offer and we stayed there until dawn. As we were leaving my house, though, I asked the police officer how they got into the yard, because I was quite sure that I had locked the front gate. He said that the gate was already open when they got in, and then it dawned on me. This was also how the dog must have gotten in. Well, I don't know who this man might have been or what he wanted, but I can't help feeling that that dog had been looking in his direction. The next morning, when we got back to the house to get our stuff and leave, we saw the same dog, alive, standing outside of the gate. Right, so I've got a pretty scary paranormal story for you all. Think of it whatever you will, but I promise I didn't make anything up. My mother had 2 miscarriages after I was born. No idea what the babies would have been, other than tiny humans too. According to my mum, the fetuses weren't developed enough yet to say anything about it. The second miscarriage nearly killed her because the nurses hadn't removed the dead fetus properly. I was 3 at the time, so I only remember my mum being at the hospital and my dad not allowing me to be in the room with mum because it would be too busy. My mum, she hated my father. Possibly never really loved him, in fact. Or at least so she says. Anyway, she hated him enough to wish him dead. Just let it happen when his mother is visiting family in England, she wished. Let it happen in a terrible car accident or something like that. My mum told me she wished exactly this. And then it actually happened. And I mean exactly the way that she wished it to be. I had just turned 4 back then. A few days after my birthday, the police came to my house to tell me that my father died in a terrible car accident. This incident caused my mum to spiral down into a psychosis. I don't remember a lot of this time because I was fairly young. But looking back, you really come to realize how you were raised by someone who probably shouldn't have been raising a kid. Since she didn't abuse me or anything, there just never was a reason to take any actions. I always noticed how my mother talked a lot to herself, both during that time and now even still. She has entire conversations, in fact. By her tone, you can determine whether she's conversing with some adult or apparently a little kid. To give an example, she'll walk into an empty room in the morning, say good morning, tell whoever that everyone is awake already, and then proceed to ask who's coming over today. And all of this while there are 0 plans of anyone coming over, and as said, the room is empty. Pretty concerning, right? The last time I visited my mum, I learned that the child she's conversing with is a little girl without a name. Out of the blue, I asked her what she would have named the baby if she'd had another girl. She told me she doesn't know, only thought about getting a baby boy after me. Anyway, my mum talking to herself isn't even the freakiest thing here. I'm talking about what I've called in this post, the darkness in the house. You see, my mum wishing my father dead, and it happening exactly the way that she wished for, well, that's not the only thing. I also wished into the darkness, twice, and both times it happened. Once when I was 10, and being petty, The girl had a part in a musical, and I wanted that part. I wished something bad would happen to her, and later that week, she had a nasty fall and broke her wrist. The second time, much more concerning. One night while I was sleeping, I had a dream where I was in some dark place and I was terrified. A male voice, which frightened me a lot, told me something horrible would happen to me. That is, unless I'd pick someone else for the terrible thing to happen with. Another voice of a shade beside me, one of a young girl, I shit you not, asked me, "Why don't you pick your mum?" Initially, I actually agreed, but it terrified me because a little voice inside my head told me that I'd regret that. So I picked my grandmother because my mum and her had been arguing for over 15 years, and my mum had decided that we would never go to see her again. About 2 weeks after I had made my wish, I received a call from my aunt telling me that my grandmother was hospitalized and doing terribly, that I'd best hurry if I ever want to see her again. So I went to the hospital terrified and in tears. My grandma had had so many painkillers, she didn't even remember I was there when I visited another day. She got somewhat better and was allowed to return home, but then she relapsed and did even worse. The doctors feared for a certain dangerous virus that was around then, so they put her in an isolation room, and it turned out that it wasn't that virus. But they couldn't figure out what really had made her sick. Well, at some point, my grandmother couldn't move at all anymore. She passed away about 2 months later, and allegedly looked so terrible that it was best to keep the coffin closed before the burial. And in the end, I had to hear the doctors never figured out what killed her. She had never been sick before. Just boom, out of the blue she got sick and just died. And all of this after I wished the terrible thing that was to happen to me would happen to her instead. Whatever is in my mum's house that's causing this, I'm terrified. Whenever my mum and I wish something bad happens to someone and mean it, it actually happens. And sometimes, even specifically, in the way we asked for it. My wife and I are remodeling a 60-plus-year-old house in a Texas city. There has been a lot of work going on for the past year and a half since we moved here. It has taken a lot just to get the house to feel comfortable, given the conditions of the extensive repairs. But I wanted to share with you some outside elements that have contributed to some uncomfortable and frightening situations. I'd like to preface the events of Wednesday, July 12th, with some interesting happenings. We moved in during the end of winter, and were sleeping in a very small guest room to optimize an electrical heater. There is a window facing the side of my house, and you can see the road in front of my house at an angle when looking out. All of this is covered with some very old, yellow blinds. It was approximately 3 a.m. when I suddenly woke up to a man's voice screaming what sounded like my name, over and over. Now, I suffer from sleep paralysis, and oftentimes have auditory hallucinations just before and after waking up. So, I gave myself a few seconds to make sure what I was hearing was indeed real. And it was. With my heart pounding, I slowly crawled out of bed and peeled back 2 of the dusty blinds to see out into the street.
"Hello? Help me! Help me! Hello?"
He was repeating this hello, sounding similar to my name. My eyes focused on the street, which was painted a dirty orange color from the street lamp. I saw a dark figure power walking down the street, eyeballing my house. He started walking towards my lawn too. I ran to make sure my doors were secure and grabbed a prying bar and my phone. I dialed 911 and had my finger on the call button. Now, at the front door, I was looking at the peephole, and I could see the man right from the right side of my view getting closer to my lawn as he disappeared out of sight. And suddenly, the screaming just stopped. I tuned my ear to the silence and was horrified to hear grass and leaves rustling near the front of my house and now right at my front door. The movement and sound stopped. I looked again and saw nothing. Well, I hit 911 and let the operator know with a whisper that someone may need help on my street, or they're attempting to possibly break in. I clutched the prying bar and waited an eternity for the door handle to move or the footsteps to leave. But neither of those things happened. The cops pulled up to my street and I gave them the above story, and they found absolutely nobody upon arrival. So, fast forward to July 12th of 2017. Again, it's about 3 a.m. and I'm having trouble sleeping. We sleep in the next room over, and the window is literally next to the other window I described earlier. The only difference is that it's closer to the street and I have a clear view of my garage cans below my window. I'm reading about the catacombs of Paris on my phone when I hear something rustling around my garbage cans. Is that an animal? Was my initial thought. Well, the rummaging sounded like it was caused by something particularly large. Also, I could now hear what I can only describe as grunts. I looked out of the window and I see a very large, dark shape. This thing is hunkered down and has now completely knocked over a can and is in my trash. At this point, I'm just confused as well as startled. It honestly looked like a baby black bear cub or something. I listened and could only hear plastic bags and items moving around with haste. And what happened next is hard to put into words, simply for the fact that it horrified me. I decided to scare this animal off. I slowly pulled on the string to the blinds and they raised up as I continued to keep my eye on the animal. I banged on the window. "Hey!" My dogs woke up and went crazy barking, wife too, but from the garbage, a fully grown man scurried off while hunkered down with a massive limp. He ran into the darkness around the corner. By now, I am completely freaking out after expecting to see a fat skunk or maybe a dog. Of course, it's probably just a homeless person, but it was just a bizarre and frightening experience to say the least. But what gives me pause is the fact that it wasn't that long ago that someone was calling my name from the street. So this happened about 6 years ago in an average town in the Midwest. I lived in a nice neighborhood, and at the end of the block were these woods. The woods had 2 small trails, but was just mainly woods, and my friend and I liked to walk through them to go to this meadow that one trail led to, and we just wanted to get away. I was hanging out with 3 other friends, Jason, Jaden, and Isaac. I wanted to show them the cool meadow and explore the woods with them. Middle school fun, right? It was early evening when we decided to go in. This time, we strayed from the trails and explored, and we found someone's little treehouse in there, which we climbed. We pretty much dicked around, and I finally suggested that we go to the meadow. I started leading them to where it was, but before we got there, a ways away from the clearing to the meadow, we saw someone standing in the forest. Their back was facing us, so I couldn't see who the man was, but it did look like a man. I'm not very good at judging distances, and I wasn't sure how far away he was, so I stopped everyone and said, "No one's usually here, guys. Let's go." But before we could go, the man turned around, and his entire eyes were pitch black. He had the creepiest smile on his face. And so, that's when we pretty much shit bricks, and Jaden shouts, "Guys, we should run." We started running the direction we came from, and that thing or person started chasing after us. I shouted to everyone that we needed to stick together and kept running and didn't look back. I must admit, I almost pissed myself on the spot because we had a good amount of distance between us. But from the get-go, with even a head start, it was right behind us. It was like it had superhuman speed. to this day, I honestly don't know how it got so close to us in such a short amount of time. Like, no normal human being could do that. Well, we strayed off the trails going through the woods and the trees, trying to get away. And finally, after some running, we stopped and tried to catch our breath, thinking that we might be safe for a moment. Finally, after a few seconds, Isaac piped up. Guys, where's Jason? We all started to panic because our friend was gone, and we couldn't see him anywhere. Did that thing get him? Did he run a different way? Then Jaden said, Guys, we gotta go and find him. We gotta go back. We all agreed, but I just wanted to go home because it scared the shit out of me. And honestly, I wanted to be out of those woods right there and then. But then, out of nowhere, Jason just popped up, like out of thin air. He asked what's up, and we all started yelling at him, pissed off that he was gone and relieved that he was back. We asked him what had happened and where he went, but we never got a straight answer from him. Well, we were happy to see our friend, and we just brushed it off and got out of there as fast as we could. Strangely enough, we never hung out after that, or even talked again since that night. I did, however, talk to Jason every now and then, and about a year ago, I asked him if he remembered that day in the woods, specifically when he was gone and separated from us. He finally gave me an answer, and it chilled me to the core. He said that he didn't know how he got there. He was apparently just as freaked out when he thought about it, not remembering anything before then. Well, anyway, ever since that evening, 6 years ago, I have refused to set foot in those woods again. There are nothing but bad vibes and bad memories in there for me. Like I've written in many of my stories about me being sensitive or haunted, this is a more recent encounter with the supernatural, and it was in my own house. I have done research of my house and the area I live in, and sure, people will die all the time, but I haven't found any horrible deaths that have happened in or around my home. So I assumed that it has to be me who is being haunted, but it's not every day. It happens every once in a while, but it mostly happens when I'm alone and my wife and daughters are not home. So, I have a man cave in my basement, and that's where I spend most of my time when the wife and the kids aren't home. Now, it has very thin flooring, so you can hear a pin drop from upstairs. And when I say that, I mean there is nothing that you can't hear from downstairs. Anyways, this last time that I was alone, I was really freaked out. I was alone watching TV with my dog when all of a sudden my dog, who was laying on my lap, got off and went to the stairs and just sat down looking up. This isn't totally weird because she does it every time she hears someone at the door, so I kind of half expected a knock at my door or the doorbell. But nothing happened, so I paid no attention to it and called my dog over. But she looked at me and looked back up the stairs, so that started to raise some alarms, but again, I just chose to ignore it. As I started to turn the volume back up on my TV, I heard a large bang from upstairs, and my dog got up and started barking up a storm. I got off the couch and told her to be quiet to try and calm her down. I picked her up and put her on the couch, and although she stopped barking, she just kept growling and looking towards the stairs. I wasn't scared at this point, so I went up to check to see what the hell the noise was. And as I went past the kitchen and into the living room, I noticed my kid's bin of toys was dumped over, and the toys were scattered all over the place. Well, this put a little bit of fear in me, I won't lie, because this bin was heavy. And not only that, but the bin was up against a wall in the living room, and yet somehow some of the toys were even down the hall by my daughter's room. That made no sense to me. But after initially looking around and not being able to figure what the hell happened, I quickly picked up all the toys and put everything back in the toy bin. I went downstairs, and as I got to the couch, I heard footsteps coming from the kids' room. But it wasn't one set, it was multiple feet, running back and forth. It was at this point where I really felt a chill down my back. So instead of sitting back down, I had to make sure that there wasn't an intruder in my home. Of course, this wasn't possible because my alarm was set, so I know nobody could have been in my house. But still, I had to go check. As I made my way to the stairs again, I got to the first step, and the running stopped. But there is this door that blocks the basement to the main floor, and it slammed open and shut really quickly. Well, I froze at this point, and this is where I got truly frightened. All of a sudden, I could hear footsteps running down the stairs, and I was at the bottom. Although I didn't see anything, I definitely felt a rush of cold air hit me. And this wasn't a light breeze, it was quick and hard, almost pushed me back in fact. I didn't have the balls to go up, so I just got back to my couch, turned the volume up on the TV, and tried to ignore what had happened, thinking that I might be going crazy. I later went back upstairs to check all the doors and the windows though, to make sure everything was secure. I want to know what's going on, but I feel like if I get too interested in this, then it might flare up or something. And my first concern is obviously my wife and kids. So, what do you guys think? My father, mother and I make frequent trips to the Smoky Mountains and stay in the cabins they have near Pigeon Forge. However, this particular trip still haunts me to this day. About 8 years ago, we stayed in a cabin that had an alarm system. It was already dark outside when we reached the cabin and got settled in. We set the alarm and thought that we should watch a movie together. While we were watching the movie, the security system alarm went off. The alarm only goes off if a door was opened. We checked the cabin top to bottom to find nothing out of the ordinary. The next morning, we called the company that rented the cabin to us to have them check out the alarm system. Someone came out and checked out the system and said that he has been called out to the cabin multiple times within the past month with the same problem. Since it's only the first day at the cabin, I'm already feeling a little bit creeped out. I noticed that there is a book on the table that guests can sign and talk about how much they love the cabin. As I was reading more and more stories, I noticed that many of them mentioned feeling unsafe, and some even mentioned that they found a wet footprint on the deck where the hot tub was. I had told my family about these stories, and they told me that they're just trying to tell scary stories and get other guests spooked. I agreed with her and go about our day. The same night, we go to bed like normal. My father slept in the basement of the cabin. I slept on the main floor beside the kitchen, and my mother, she slept on the top floor. My dad snores so loud that we all sleep far away from each other, including my mum. It was about 2 a.m. in the morning when I am awoken up by the fridge door closing. I looked at the bright light from the fridge that was pouring into my room from the crack underneath my closed bedroom door. I noticed that the light would come and go as the fridge door seemed to continue to open and close. I assumed it was one of my parents leaning on the fridge door, trying to decide what they wanted to eat for a late snack. However, I felt weird and didn't even consider to get out of bed to join in on the snack. The fridge light disappeared slowly, and I heard footsteps walk away from my bedroom and head in the direction of the steps to go up to my mum's room. The footsteps seemed to stop for a second, then start the trip up the stairs. All of a sudden, they stopped again. I assumed it was my mother and that she made it to her room, so I fell back asleep. The next morning, I wake up and go directly to my mum and ask what she decided to eat last night. She looked at me and asked, "What?" I told her that I thought that she was at the fridge last night, opening and closing the fridge because I heard her go back upstairs after a while around 2 a.m. She looked at me and said, "I thought that was you." At this time in my life, I was known to sleepwalk every now and then, so it kind of made sense. She said that she saw me standing at the top of the stairs last night, around that time, and that she had assumed I was sleepwalking because I had looked at her and just went back downstairs. Well, at this point, I start to freak out and become sick to my stomach. The rest of the trip, I slept with my mother on the very top floor. I didn't experience anything else the rest of the trip, and never went anywhere alone. A couple of months go by after our trip when my dad tells me that he was looking to rent another cabin for a trip, Went to go look at the cabin we rented the last time and found out that the cabin had been closed and is no longer available to rent. Out of curiosity, he did some research and asked some questions and found out that many guests experienced something in that cabin. Apparently the complaints ranged from feeling unsafe to people thinking someone was in the cabin that shouldn't have been, to people leaving before their vacation was even over. I'm not sure what my mother and I experienced that night at the cabin, but I now know that we weren't the only ones that went through something similar.